Folks, welcome back to the Bobby Bo Show. Here's the moves it starts with. It's a Queen's Gambit accepted. They take the pawn, and here you can play e3 or e4, and I choose e3 because if they try to defend the pawn, there's a certain trap that I like to go for, but instead they play e6. It's better for them to finish development instead of trying to save this pawn, and now instead of taking it back right away, I can just play knight to f3 and take it back on the next move. They can't play something like this, so no way to defend this. That's why the Queen's Gambit is not really actually a gambit. It's more of a Queen's trade the pawn or not, but that doesn't sound as good. But what does sound good is my YouTube shorts, and I noticed that everyone's been stealing my YouTube shorts and getting millions of views very easily. And I just want to say, keep doing it, guys, and let them know who sent it. You know, Bobby Bo Show. But stay focused, because after c5, they're about to break open the middle. And what do I do now? Well, I can either play knight to f3 and get ready to take back with the knight, or take the pawn, and then after they take, I'll take back with the pawn, and we have an isolated queen's pawn. And the theme of the game is now centered around this pawn. Is it a weakness or a strength? And that depends on whether or not we can control it or if they can take it. But for now, it's safe. I'll play something like knight to f3, and we'll try to get the pawn down the board maybe and turn it into a queen later. But knight to f6, and we're just finishing development. Knight to f3, bishop to e7, and now I could castle, or I could develop my bishop. But this game, I was feeling like trying something a little bit new, and I was thinking about how this pawn might become a target once they castle. We might be able to break open the king and target this pawn and just stack up on it. So I played queen to e2, and after they castle, now I castle, and they play knight to c6, adding another attacker to the pawn here, queen and the knight attacking it. So I have to defend it with bishop to e3, and now I'm almost done developing. Just bring the rooks out, and after knight to g4, hitting my bishop here. Now I'm thinking that's not a problem, because this bishop is just defending this pawn. So if they trade one of their good knights for my bishop that's just defending a pawn, I can take back with this pawn. That opens up my rook, and then I have two pawns in the middle. This pawn's not isolated anymore, it has a defender, and then we can maybe just push the pawns up. So I'm not worried about this knight here. In fact, now the knight does not defend the h7 square, so I'm trying to look at tactics about going after the h7 square. But first, I want to get this rook into the middle and put it behind the pawn. So I play knight to b1, mouse slip, and I asked for a take back, but they declined. They played a6. I just go back to where I was, and we basically lost a move, but still an even game. But the evaluation goes from barely in white's favor to barely in black's favor. So a bit of a difference now. Maybe I'm on the defense now. And after b5, now my bishop's under attack. And I either go bishop to b3 or bishop to d3. And this diagonal is kind of blocked off, but I was thinking about targeting this pawn. So maybe there's some sort of tactic there eventually, but not right now. I play bishop to d3 because now the bishop's on this diagonal, and I'm looking at something like a bishop sacrifice here. King takes, knight moves, checks the king, and then this knight's not defended, so I take it. But right now there's a bishop and a queen here, and only my bishop here, so that would not be a good trade, because after takes, check, takes, so no good. Bishop to b7, and now their bishop is about to be on a strong diagonal with my king. They're almost fully developed. Both of us have a pretty good position, and all I have left to do now is develop my rooks. So let's bring this rook out, because this rook might get opened up here. So we'll bring the rook to d1, and I wanted it to be in front of the queen and also behind this pawn. So I figured just a better place for my rook, and after knight to b4, now their bishop is opened up, activating their bishop. Their knight's attacking my bishop. But once again, I'm not really worried about them taking my bishop. I don't know, a lot of players will just think that they need to move their knights and trade it for the bishop, but you only want to do that if you have a good reason. And right now, my bishops might not be doing as much as their knights. So I'm not worried about the trade, and if they take my bishop, I'll probably just double my rooks up behind the pawn here. I figure that's probably a good position for me. But I'm still looking at this tactic here. And I like having the bishop on this diagonal. In my last video, you actually saw me win the game because bishop on b1. I'm trying to go for something like that again. So I decide I want to save the bishop, and I just go bishop to b1. And now this knight's not really doing anything on b4. I'm just going to play like a3, and then it has to go backwards. So not doing anything here on b4. And here they decide to play knight captures e4, finally trading their knight off for my bishop. And that was a pawn anyway to me. And now I have two pawns in the middle, and I can move them up. The bishops can't move forward, so maybe I like this better. And now they realize that this knight's not really doing anything here, so knight to d5. And I could take here, but why would I do that? It just maybe take with the bishop. And now that I think about it, maybe best to take here. But I was thinking if they take my knight, I take back with the pawn, and then I have three pawns connected when I just had a single isolated pawn before. So I figure that's probably an improvement. But the c3 pawn might be weak if they trade here, knight for knight. Then they can play something like queen to c7, bring the rook over, and they can probably target this pawn. I probably can't defend it long term. And if I trade, I don't know what I was thinking. I guess if the pawn takes back, then their bishop is useless. So that would be good. And if the bishop takes, then I play something like e4, right? So I probably should have just taken the knight here and then I would have had a really solid position and their bishops would have been pretty useless. But instead I played e4 right here, and now they should take my knight and then target the c3 pawn. But instead, they decide to go knight to f4, hitting my queen here. But it's not really a good threat, because now I can play queen to e3, hitting the knight, and now the knight just has to go back to g6. And this is a great position. 2 pawns in the center, knight's out, bishop back here on a strong diagonal, rooks are activated, completely even game, but I'm pretty much in control of the board for now. And I can also decide how to play out the rest of the game here. And I'm thinking, well, 2 pawns in the middle here. Maybe try to push them down the middle, get a passed pawn, promote it to a queen, get all my pieces behind it. So I'm thinking either something like e5 or e4 here. What would you do? And apparently just e5 is the best here. e5, knight to e4. But instead I played d5. Inaccurate. And what's not good about this? Well, I'm thinking they just take the pawn here, and then I can take back with the knight. We'll have a rook behind, in front of the queen here. I'm thinking I'm threatening stuff, and we're getting a passed pawn here in the middle, getting everything behind it pretty easily and running it down. So no problems, right? But let's see how it goes. I'm creating some weaknesses that I was not accounting for. And after e captures d5, now I play knight captures d5. And of course, there's a threat here. So they want to move their queen out of the way or take with the bishop. And I suppose they like this bishop. It is very strong on the diagonal here, but maybe they don't want to trade it off. They play queen to c8. And now what would you do? Hopefully you see a tactic. Puzzle players should be able to get this one. And if you saw knight to b6 fork, you lose. Oh my gosh. I thought for a few minutes and I played this move, and then I pretty much immediately noticed why I lose. Now they just have bishop to c5 and your queen is pinned to the king. And then your knight's under attack, and you can't take the bishop because it's defended by the queen. And if you take their queen, let's just see it. They play bishop to c5, you take their queen, they take your queen with check. Now you have to move your king, and then they take your knight, and then they're up a piece, and you have no compensation for that. So there's absolutely no hope of winning. But they didn't see it. Oh my goodness. Instead, they played queen to c5, and I'm still losing, but it's not completely losing yet. I should have just taken the bishop here with check. They take back with the knight, and then it's a drawn game. But here we are. And what would you do now? You have to minimize the damage here. So the rest of this game is all about just trying not to lose. And if you take the queen here, they take back with the bishop with check. And then you're losing this knight. So you cannot take the queen. You have to find something else. Your queen's not defended here, and your knight's under attack. Your knight is not defended. And your queen is actually the only piece that can defend the knight right now. So what do? Well, you need to move your queen to safety. So you either have queen to d4 or queen to f2. I played queen to f2, and now their best move is just to trade queens. And after I take back with the rook, now they can't play bishop to c5 anymore, pinning my rook to the king, because I can just take their rook. And then they take, and I take back, and then it's just an even game. So that's no longer an option. Now they play rook a to d8, attacking my rook here. And if I take, they take back. And then there's threats of back rank. They have an open file. I don't really want to do that trade. Instead, I want to keep the pieces on the board here. I play rook to c1. And thinking about something like rook to c7, putting the rook on the 7th rank here. And then maybe there's some tactics from there. But after rook to d6, attacking my knight now, it's not looking good. What can I even do here? Well, the knight is almost trapped. Can't go anywhere over here. Only square is right here. And remember, we're trying to minimize the damage here. Can't do something like this to attack the bishops, because they just take the knight and defend the bishop, and then this bishop's defended by this knight. So there's nothing to do except knight to d5, and then after they take the knight with the bishop, take back with the pawn, they take the pawn, and now we're officially down material. They only have 1 pawn though, and a 1 pawn advantage by itself, it's not enough to checkmate. They have to promote to a queen, so they still have to play the endgame. And that's where we have a chance to come back by playing a better endgame. So, what's the most useless piece we have right now? This rook. Let's play rook to e2, hitting the bishop here if this knight moves. So they want to move this bishop. Bishop to c5 check, and now my king has to go out of the way. King to f1 would have maybe been better. King to h1 though. And now the bishop slides back to b6. And the king probably should just be activating here. I'm just getting back rank checkmated, having my king back here when I could. It's not really in much more danger being on f2. It's actually better, more active in the endgame if it's on f1. But now what do? And personally, I realized that if they're only up a pawn, I might be able to sneak out a draw if we start getting rid of all of the pieces. Because if they only have a bishop, then they can't checkmate me. And the less pieces that they have, the harder it's going to be for them to win more material. Hopefully, if I can defend properly. So I go for the trade here. Bishop takes knight, and now their pawns are doubled up, but I activated their rook here. And what would you do now? what would you do if you were white here? And you have to create some sort of activity here. And this bishop's not defended. This pawn's not defended. Hopefully you see something like rook to e6. And we're creating some activity here, maybe a draw still. And if you thought about maybe moving this rook up because you think that your knight and your rook can defend here, then you lose. I played rook to c6. And then I thought, oh my gosh, how did I miss this? Because there's 3 different ways to get checkmated here. And they all start with rook to d1 check. And then what do? If you block with the knight, checkmate. If you block with the knight here, checkmate. And if you block with the rook, checkmate. So you lose 3 different ways here, and they didn't see any of them. They played rook to f6, and I'm still losing kind of, but it's way better than mate in 3 here. And I could play rook to c8 check. And the idea here is to trade off these rooks without letting them undouble their pawns here. But instead, I'm thinking about how I want to simplify into an endgame where they can't promote. I take the rook here, and I figure we just have to trade this rook off now. But after they take back with the pawn, now they have 3 pawns connected with a pawn advantage on this side of the board, and they can actually promote here no problem if they play right. But after rook to d2, offering the rook trade, they accept the rook trade, and after I take back with the knight, they play king to f7. And here's the endgame, an important endgame. They're up a pawn, and we both have a minor piece, but they have a bishop and I have a knight. And what's the difference here? Well, their bishop is a dark squared bishop, and it can only go on dark squares, of course. So if I put my pawns on light squares, their bishop cannot attack my pawn. On the other hand, my knight can jump around to any square on any color, and it can jump around the board hitting multiple targets. But because this is such an open game, this bishop has long diagonals. The bishop is probably slightly better here because it can defend all the pawns on multiple sides of the board here. But they have to play the right moves here, and I'm going to make them. I play b3, putting my pawn on the light square. They play a5. Now I play g4, putting my other pawn on the light square. And now my king can come out to the middle, but so can theirs. King to e6, king to g2, f5. I trade the pawns here, and they don't want to take with the g pawn and separate their pawns. So they take with the king. Now they have 2 pawns versus 1 pawn, and it's completely winning. Engine says -6 still. King to f3, blocking the king from moving forward, but the pawn can still come forward. So h3, defending the square here, but now h5, and they're getting ready to push. Still completely winning for black, and the engine says knight to f1 here, probably to try to defend against these pawn pushes, but instead I play a4. Now what would you do if you're black and you wanted to win the game? And hopefully you know your endgames, and you play b4 here, and you're crushing -7, and I can't do anything. Your bishop is helping the promotion and defending the backwards pawn, but instead they take my pawn, and now it's a draw. Engine says -1.3, so maybe they can still win, but it's also maybe a draw now. I take back with the pawn, and my pawn's on a light square. They can't take it with the bishop, blocking this pawn, so they have to bring their king over here if they want to take this pawn. And I'm about to play knight to c4, hitting this pawn, so they have to defend it with their bishop. But first they can play g4 check, hitting my king here and my pawn, so I have to take the pawn. They take back, checking my king again. I have to step in front of the pawn. But now they play bishop to c7 check. And I have to step back now, and they're getting ready to move the pawn forward. The king comes forward to f4, and now what can I do? Well, just knight to c4, hitting this pawn, making sure that the bishop has to stay here defending it. But after g3, now the bishop can defend both pawns. But I'm going to use that to my advantage here, and I'm going to play knight to d2. Getting ready to maybe play knight to f1 and maybe take this pawn if we need to. But now they attack my knight with king to e3. And what should I do now? I could play knight to f1 check here, and after like king to d4, take, they're going to come over here and take my pawn, but I can get back in time. And now if they do something like a2 to try to stop my king from getting over here, I just step to c2, and now we have a draw. They can't get out in front of the pawn. So my king is coming over to a1 here, but I actually didn't think that far ahead. I actually thought if I take this pawn here and they trade bishop for knight, then their king might be able to get over here and promote the pawn. I didn't actually want to calculate it, because I knew if I just played knight to c4 here, checking the king, hitting the pawn again, that after king to d3, attacking my knight, well, what would you do here? Bishop defending both the pawns now. Your knight's under attack. The king is about to come over, take your pawn, and then they're going to push and promote. What do? Hopefully you played the brilliant knight captures a5. And if the bishop takes, you take the pawn, and it's a draw. They're going to take your pawn, but a king and a bishop cannot checkmate. Drawn game, so they don't take my knight. They think maybe they can get their king over here and take this pawn, and then somehow promote this, but they cannot. They play king to c3, but now just get the knight out of the way, play knight to c6, and look, the knight blocks this square, defends this square, the pawn can come down, and it looks like I'm about to promote. The king cannot get here in time. King to b3 attacking the pawn, but I just move it forward. And the king cannot catch up now. And I'm about to promote unless they take with the bishop here. So they have to take with the bishop. And it's a draw. And now, nothing I can do. Game over. It's a draw, but it's not a loss. And that's the important part. I did make a big blunder, and I should have lost a few times, but I did everything I can to minimize the damage, and I eventually got the draw. So instead of losing a bunch of rating, I didn't lose anything. And if you can turn some of your losses into draws, you'll be gaining a lot more rating because you'll be losing less. So spend some time studying endgames, figure out how to win and how to draw, and smash like if you learned something, just so I know. Make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching the Bobby Bo Show. Hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Bye.